She looked him dead in the eyes and whispered 3 words that should have ended everything. "You don't have to." And he just stood there. No relief. No exit. No polite nod before walking away like every other man in her life had done. He took one slow step forward. Then another. And what came out of his mouth next, 4 quiet words spoken in a penthouse high above the city, didn't just change her life. It rebuilt her. But here's what nobody tells you about this story. She didn't win because she was beautiful or rich or lucky. She won because one dying man loved her enough to make the most dangerous man in Boston make a promise. And this man, he never broke promises. Stay with me, because this story is going to hit somewhere deep. And I promise you, the ending? Nobody sees it coming. If you're new here, welcome to Real Life Echo, where we tell the stories that actually matter. Hit subscribe right now because we drop something like this every single day. The rain was hammering the penthouse windows like something furious trying to get in. Angela Kerr stood in the middle of a room that did not belong to her, wearing a dress she could not afford, preparing to say the one sentence she had practiced 40 times in the mirror that morning. Across the room, Jack Mloud stood near the bar cart with his back to the city skyline. Suit jacket open, jaw set. Gray eyes that had made grown men stammer in courtrooms and boardrooms, watching her with the kind of silence that weighs more than most people's entire speeches. This man could buy the building she lived in and forget about it by Tuesday. And she was about to release him. "You don't have to marry me," she said it steady. Practiced. Cling. She waited for the relief to cross his face. The polite exit. The graceful retreat. Every man she had ever known had eventually found a reason to walk away from Angela Kerr. Jack Mloud had more reasons than any of them. He set his glass down. The quiet click of crystal on marble was the only sound in the room. Then he asked a question that stopped her cold. "Are you finished deciding what I want?" Now, to understand what happens next, you have to understand what happened 3 weeks before that night. In a private hospital room at Massachusetts General, Nolan Kerr was dying. 34 years old. Pancreatic cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to the end. And by the time the doctors said there was nothing left to try, Nolan had already known for weeks. He could feel it the way sailors feel a storm. Not in the sky. In the bones. Jack Mloud was the last person to see him alive. They had known each other since they were 17. 2 boys from South Boston who had understood one thing about the world from a very young age. It does not give things to people like them. It takes. When Jack was 23, still proving himself in the brutal hierarchy of the Mloud organization, a deal went wrong in a warehouse off the waterfront. 2 men from a rival crew cornered him. One had a gun. The other had a chain. Jack would have died that night if Nolan Kerr hadn't come through a side door with a crowbar and a willingness to bleed. Nolan took a bullet in the shoulder. Jack took a scar across his ribs. And from that night forward, there was nothing Jack Mloud would not do for Nolan Kerr. Nothing. So when Nolan lay in that hospital bed, tubes running out of him like roots trying to hold him to the earth, and he looked at Jack with those morphine-heavy eyes. And he said the one thing Jack never expected. Jack leaned forward. "I need you to look after Angela." "Who?" "My cousin. She's alone, Jack. She's been alone her whole life. Her family, they don't see her. They never did. She's the only good person in that whole family. The only one who visited me here. The only one who sat in this room and didn't look at me like I was already a corpse." Jack waited. "Marry her." 3 seconds of silence. "Nolan. Not because you love her. I'm not asking that. I'm asking you to protect her. She deserves someone who won't let the world keep stepping on her. And you're the only person I trust." Jack sat very still. He thought about his empire, his enemies, the violence and luxury and danger that formed the architecture of his life. He thought about bringing a civilian woman into that life. A woman he had never met. Then he looked at Nolan Kerr, the man who had taken a bullet for him in a warehouse, and he said the only thing he could say. "I'll take care of her. Promise me." "I promise." Nolan Kerr died 14 hours later. And Jack Mloud pulled out his phone and read a text Nolan had sent 3 days earlier. A name, an address, and one line. "She won't ask for help. You'll have to offer it." Jack stood at the back of the church. He always stood at the back. You survive longer when nobody can see you from behind. He scanned the room. Professional habit. Exits, faces, hands. And then he saw her. Angela Kerr sat at the end of the 3rd pew. Alone. Not beside the family. Not included in the cluster of relatives who had arranged themselves in the front rows like a photograph meant to prove they cared. She sat apart. Brown skin. Dark hair pulled back. A black dress that was clean and pressed but not expensive. a thin silver chain around her neck. Her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the altar. She was not performing grief. She was living it. Jack watched the family. He watched Nolan's aunt lean over and whisper something to the woman beside her. Both of them glanced back at Angela. Angela saw it, and something in her face shut down, like a light behind a curtain. After the service, no one stopped to hug her. No one said they were sorry. No one pulled her close and said Nolan talked about you all the time. She stood on the church steps alone, blinking in the gray October light, holding her purse against her stomach like a shield. Then she turned and began walking toward the bus stop. Jack pushed off the wall. He caught up to her halfway down the block. When she heard footsteps behind her, she turned quickly, wide eyes, automatic caution, the quiet threat assessment that every woman learns before she learns algebra. Angela Kerr. My name is Jack Mloud. I was a friend of Nolan's. Something softened in her face immediately. Nolan talked about you, she said. Not a question. He talked about you too. A flicker of surprise. Then the ghost of a smile that did not quite survive the day. He shouldn't have. There's not much to talk about. And there it was. The sentence that hit Jack somewhere beneath his ribs. There's not much to talk about. Said about herself. Casually. Automatically. The way someone says a thing they have been told so many times it stopped feeling like a lie. 3 days later Jack called. He said 4 words. Can we meet tonight? She arrived at Marrow Restaurant in a navy blouse and dark slacks, her hair down, a touch of lipstick she had probably debated for 20 minutes. She looked around the room with the careful, slightly overwhelmed expression of a woman cataloging every detail so she could remember it later. Because places like this were not her life. And she knew it. Jack stood when she approached. He had been raised to stand when a woman enters a room, regardless of who she is. It was the one soft thing he had kept in a life otherwise defined by hardness. When the waiter came, Jack ordered for both of them. Not because he assumed she couldn't choose, but because he had watched her scan the menu with the tiny, almost invisible frown of a woman calculating prices. He wanted to remove that weight from her evening. Then he leaned forward and said it. Nolan asked me to marry you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Angela had ever heard. I'm sorry, he asked you to what? He asked me to marry you. To protect you. To make sure you had someone in your corner. Angela's face went through 5 things at once. Confusion. Embarrassment. Gratitude. And the particular grief of being loved from beyond the grave. Look at me, she said. And her voice cracked slightly at the edges. I'm a 32-year-old woman who works a hotel front desk and lives in a walk-up in Quincy. I'm not the kind of woman that men like. She stopped herself. Pressed her fingers to her forehead. Nolan shouldn't have put this on you. Jack waited until she was finished. Then very quietly, here's what I'm proposing. A legal marriage. 1 year. At the end, if you want to walk away, you walk away. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. But for 1 year you carry my name. You live under my protection. And no one, not your aunt, not her daughters, not anyone, treats you like you don't matter. Angela stared at him. Why? Because Nolan asked me to. And because I keep my promises. She went home and paced her apartment for 4 days. In the mirror. At 2 in the morning. On her bathroom floor. And the whole time she kept hearing her aunt's voice from 20 years ago. Some women are roses. Some women are weeds. Best to know which one you are. She had been 17 when her aunt said that. After a boy at school had asked her to prom as a joke. Now a man who could have any woman in Boston was offering her his name. And she couldn't stop hearing the word weeds. She picked up the phone. I'll do it. Good, Jack said. And after a pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Bring whatever you want to keep. I'll take care of the rest. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. Angela wore a cream-colored dress from a consignment shop in Cambridge. Simple. Elegant. The kind of dress that whispered instead of shouted. When she walked in, Jack turned. And something crossed his face, quick, private, like a door opening and immediately closing. Angela felt it in the center of her chest. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," there was absolute stillness. Jack turned to her. The distance between them felt like a country. Vast and unmapped and full of things neither of them understood yet. He leaned down. And he kissed her forehead. Not her mouth. Her forehead. A gesture so tender and so unexpected that Angela's eyes closed involuntarily. And she felt something crack inside her that she hadn't even known was holding. It lasted 2, maybe 3 seconds. Then Jack offered her his arm and they walked out as husband and wife. And Angela thought. He kissed my forehead like he was making a promise to something he hasn't named yet. The first week, they moved around each other like planets in neighboring orbits. Close enough to feel the pull. Far enough to pretend it wasn't there. Jack left early. Came home late. They ate together twice, both times in silence at the kitchen island. But Jack noticed everything. He noticed she washed dishes by hand even though the penthouse had a dishwasher. He noticed she made the bed with hospital corners every morning, tight and precise, as if she were trying to prove she deserved the space. He noticed she moved along the edges of the apartment, quietly, taking up as little room as possible. He noticed her books. Literary fiction, thick novels with cracked spines, carried in her purse like contraband. He noticed the way she spoke to hotel guests on the phone, patient and warm and genuinely kind. The voice of someone who had decided to be gentle in a world that had never been gentle with her. And then, on a Tuesday night, something shifted. Jack came home past midnight, jaw tight, knuckles raw beneath his gloves. He walked into the kitchen expecting darkness. Angela was at the island. Cup of tea. A book. Reading glasses he'd never seen before. She looked up, saw his hands, said nothing. She stood up, went to the cupboard, poured hot water from a kettle she had kept warm, set a mug in front of him, tea already steeping, sat back down, returned to her book. Jack stood there looking at the mug, and something in his chest, something that had not moved in a very long time, softened. He sat across from her, wrapped his bruised hands around the mug, drank in silence while she read. 20 minutes. Neither of them spoke. It was the most peaceful 20 minutes Jack Mloud had experienced in years. After that, it became a pattern. And Jack, who had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, began coming home earlier and earlier. Not because he had to. Because the apartment felt different when she was in it. It felt like something he didn't have a word for. 3 weeks in, Miriam Kerr showed up. Jack was at his office when his security feed buzzed. He pulled it up on his laptop. A woman in the lobby. Mid-60s. Expensive coat. Body held so tightly it looked like it might snap. Beside her, a younger woman with the calculated prettiness of someone who spent significant money on being looked at. He called Angela immediately. "Your aunt is here. Do you want me to come home?" Silence. "I've been handling her my whole life, Jack. I can handle her in your lobby." He heard something new in her voice. Not just strength. Something sharper. The first syllable of enough. He watched the security feed. Miriam walked into the penthouse the way a real estate appraiser walks into a property. Angela stood by the kitchen island in jeans and a gray sweater. Arms crossed. Face neutral. The practiced stillness of someone who has stood in this particular storm before. "Well," Miriam said, scanning the room. "Quite the upgrade from Quincy." Then the cousin, Trisha, circled to the windows, eyes wide with unguarded envy. "I mean, no offense, but how did someone like you end up with someone like—" She gestured at the penthouse, at the view, at the life. Angela had heard those words 100 times in 100 different forms. Someone like you doesn't get invited. Someone like you should be grateful. Someone like you shouldn't expect too much. And then Miriam said it. The thing that changed everything. "I need to know you're not going to embarrass this family." And Angela Kerr, for the first time in her life, said the thing she had never let herself say. "This family didn't come to Nolan's funeral. Not you. Not Trisha. Not Uncle David. I sat alone in a pew while you whispered about me from the front row. So I'm not sure which family you're worried about protecting." The silence that followed changed the furniture of the room. Miriam's mouth opened. Closed. Opened. "How dare you?" "I dare," Angela said. "Because I'm in my own home. And I have been listening to you tell me what I am since I was 12 years old. And I am finished." Jack, watching from his office, leaned back in his chair. And something crossed his face that he was not ready to name. The recognition of a woman who had been fighting alone for a very long time, and who had just, for the first time, fought in a space where she was allowed to win. Miriam left. Trisha followed. Angela stood alone in the kitchen. Hands shaking. Jaw tight. Breathing through her nose. And Jack, who had sat across from federal prosecutors without blinking, felt something in his chest that he could not destroy or dismantle. The beginning of something that had no business existing in a man like him. It was a rainy Wednesday when Trisha walked into the Harbor Regency with 2 friends. Angela was behind the front desk. "Oh my God, Angela. I didn't know you still worked here." Trisha turned to her friends with theatrical delight. "This is my cousin Angela. She recently married a very wealthy man, which is hilarious because she laughed, covered her mouth, performed the cruelty as comedy. Does he look at you during, Or does he just close his eyes and think of someone prettier? The lobby went quiet. Angela felt heat climb the back of her neck. The tightness in her throat. The old familiar weight of a wound that had never fully closed. She opened her mouth to deflect. To absorb. To do what she had always done. Then a voice cut across the lobby like a blade through silk. Trisha Kerr. Every head turned. Jack Mloud stood near the entrance. Rain darkening the shoulders of his overcoat. Hair slightly damp. Gray eyes fixed on Trisha with the kind of absolute focus that makes rooms go still. He had come to pick Angela up. He had been doing that lately. Showing up at the end of her shift. Driving her home. Telling himself it was practical. He had walked in time to hear everything. Trisha went white. Jack walked toward the desk. Unhurried. Precise. The way a man moves when he has never needed to rush because the world has learned to wait for him. He stopped beside Angela. Beside her. Close enough that his arm nearly touched hers. Close enough that everyone in the lobby understood exactly what it meant. Let me be very clear, he said. And his voice was quiet. Conversational. The kind of quiet that is more frightening than any shout. You will not speak to my wife that way. Not here. Not anywhere. Not ever again. Trisha's lips moved. No sound. And since we're here, I did not marry Angela because I had to. Not because of Nolan. Not because of obligation. He paused. I married her because she is the most remarkable person I have ever met. And the fact that you and your mother have spent 32 years too blind to see that is not her failure. It's yours. 200 square feet of lobby. Complete silence. Jack turned to Angela. The cold authority dissolved. What replaced it was something she had only ever seen in glimpses. Ready to go? She looked at him. Eyes bright. Chin steady. Yes. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked through the revolving doors into the rain. And Angela did not look back. 6 blocks of silence. The rain streaked the windshield. The city blurred like a watercolor painting of a world that suddenly looked different. On the 7th block. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She's my cousin. She's always been. You've learned to take it. I know. That's the problem. Angela pressed her lips together. Looked out the window. Her reflection stared back. A woman who had spent her life being small, sitting next to a man who had just told a room full of strangers she was remarkable. Jack. Yeah. What you said in there. About not marrying me out of obligation. She turned to face him. Did you mean it? Jack pulled the car to the curb. Put it in park. Turned off the engine. The rain drummed on the roof. He turned to look at her fully. The way he looked at things that mattered. I would have kept my promise no matter what, he said. I would have married you and protected you and made sure you were taken care of. Because Nolan asked me to. He stopped. But somewhere between the tea at midnight and the stew on Thursday night and the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're reading? He looked at her. The promise stopped being the reason. Angela's breath caught. You became the reason. The rain fell. The car was warm. Millions of people rushing through Boston, oblivious to the fact that in a black sedan on a side street, a woman who had spent 32 years believing she was invisible, was being seen. Truly. Completely. Devastatingly seen. She reached across the console and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers. Tight. Immediate. As if he had been waiting without knowing he was waiting. I'm not going to let you go, he said. I know that wasn't the deal. But I need you to know, I'm not letting you go. Angela's eyes filled. I wasn't planning on leaving, she whispered. Jack lifted her hand to his mouth. Pressed his lips against her knuckles. Not exactly a kiss. Something deeper. A seal. A signature on a contract no lawyer could draft and no court could break. Spring came. Angela started school. BU? English literature. She sat in the front row and she did not apologize for being there. Jack watched her change. She stopped moving along the edges of the apartment. She argued with him about books, told him he was wrong about Hemingway, too afraid of emotion. He told her she was wrong about McCarthy. They argued for an hour. Resolved nothing. It was the best hour of his week. One evening in late April, a charity gala at the Four Seasons, Angela wore a dark green dress made specifically for her. Jack had arranged it. When she asked why, he said, I want them to see you the way I see you. When she walked out of the bedroom, Jack looked up from adjusting his cufflinks. His hands went completely still. He stared at her the way you stare at something that has been there your whole life but that you are seeing for the first time, in the right light. You look, he stopped. I look what? Like the reason I come home. At the gala, she walked in on his arm and felt every eye in the room perform the calculation. The quick, involuntary assessment that happens when a powerful man appears with a woman who doesn't match the template. This time, Angela did not shrink. She stood straight. She looked back at the faces trying to figure out the equation. She was done being a mystery that needed solving. She was a fact. Later on the dance floor, Jack. "Yeah. I think I love you," said into his chest, almost hoping the orchestra would swallow it. His arms tightened. "I know you do." She looked up. "That's arrogant. It's observational." "And do you?" Jack stopped dancing. Right in the middle of the floor. He lifted her chin with one finger. "Angela Kerr Mloud," he said. "I have run an empire. I have survived things that would break most people. I have sat across from men who wanted me dead and I did not flinch. Pause. But when you smile at me, I forget how to breathe. And that is not something I was prepared for. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. That's an always. That's every single morning I wake up next to you and can't believe you're real." She kissed him. On the dance floor. In front of 200 people. In front of every person who had looked at her when she walked in and wondered, what is a man like Jack Mloud doing with a woman like her? And the answer was written in the space between their mouths. He wasn't doing anything with her. He was choosing her. Freely. Fully. Without a single reservation. And she was choosing him back. The year passed. The deadline came and went without acknowledgement. No conversation. No exit. No renegotiation. On the day of their 12-month anniversary, Jack came home with a small box. Not a ring box. A locket. Thin gold chain. One small pendant. Inside two things. A photograph of Nolan. Young, grinning years before the diagnosis. And a tiny folded piece of paper. Angela unfolded it. 4 words. In Jack's handwriting, sharp and precise and certain. "You were never invisible." Angela stood there holding the locket in her palm. And she finally, completely understood the full shape of what had happened to her. A dying man had loved her enough to ask the impossible. A powerful man had kept his promise. And somewhere in the keeping of it, the promise had become something that obligation and duty alone could never explain. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the necklace. For staying. For seeing. For choosing her when he didn't have to." Jack pulled her close. His arms went around her. And they stood there in the penthouse, above the harbor, in the city, in the life they had built from obligation and observation and protection and devotion. Angela pressed her ear against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. "I was never invisible. I just hadn't met the right pair of eyes." And Jack held her and thought about a warehouse on the waterfront and a man with a crowbar and a bullet in his shoulder. And he thought, "Thank you, Nolan. That's the whole story. And I want you to sit with it for a second. Because this is not a story about a rich man saving a poor woman. This is a story about what happens when one person, just one, decides to see you. Really see you. Not the version of you that's been beaten down and minimized and told to take up less space. The real you. If you've been made to feel invisible, in your family, in your relationship, in any room you've ever walked into, I want you to hear this. The problem was never you. It was always their vision. Drop a comment below and tell me, was there ever someone in your life who truly saw you when others didn't? I read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs it right now. That one share, it might change something for them. And if you're not subscribed to Real Life Echo yet, do it now. Hit the bell. Because the next story coming your way makes this one look like the warm-up.